By the time you finish watching this video, you're going to have a really good concept of what bipolar mania is. We're going to talk about the different stages of mania, what symptoms to watch out for, how it's treated, and how it even correlates to the type of bipolar that you might be diagnosed with. Please take your time watching this video. There's going to be a lot of information and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, so watch it a couple of times if you have to. I'm proud to say that this is the 7th video in our series called Faces of Bipolar Disorder. If you've seen the other videos in this series, then you're probably starting to get a really good concept of what it means to have bipolar. If this is your first time here, a very warm welcome to Polar Warriors. So let's get to it. Bipolar disorder has two primary symptoms that dominate and define the illness, and these of course are the mania and depression. We basically bounce back and forth between these two polar opposites, and that's what loosely defines what bipolar disorder is. The duration or severity of these symptoms is what doctors look at in order to diagnose us with a specific type of bipolar disorder. And one of the major symptoms, of course, being mania is what we're going to be talking about today. So the first stage of mania that we're going to look at is what's known as hypomania, or a hypomanic state. The word literally means or translates into under mania or less than mania. Now, like many people, when I first heard the word hypomania, I thought it sounded like hypermania or some kind of extreme mania, but it's actually a milder form of mania in general. Now, mild doesn't mean easy or simple when it comes to bipolar disorder. It never does. But according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, or the DSM, the basic difference between hypomania and mania is this. With hypomania, there's no significant impairment when it comes to our ability to actually function. With mania, it does actually cause significant impairment, and it might progress to also include what's known as psychotic features, which we'll get to more later in this video. So the primary symptoms or signs of hypomania are things like a decrease in the need for sleep, extreme focus or obsessing over projects at work or at home, feeling elated or overly enthusiastic about life, becoming more social or overly talkative, an increase in confidence or competitiveness, enhanced productivity or creativity, easily becoming distracted, having a lot more energy than usual, a noticeable increase in sex drive, and engaging in risky or reckless pleasure-seeking behaviors. Oh, and substance abuse. That's a big one that can get worse when we're manic. I used to drink a lot more when I was manic, and it just added rocket fuel to the whole situation. Hypomania is what those with type 2 bipolar disorder and cyclothymia experience when they're manic. It can go on for just a few days or even last for months. For those of us who have bipolar type 1, like I do, we also experience hypomania, but the difference is that we can progress from hypomanic to what we call full-blown mania, or even mania with psychotic features. It's basically like hypomania on steroids, so to speak. The way we experience mania has actually a lot to do with how bipolar disorder is diagnosed in the first place. The depression is very similar between the different types, aside from how frequent or how long it lasts, but the mania is quite different. There's also what's loosely known as chronic hypomania, which just means that the hypomania lasts a lot longer than it does for most people. Anyways, hypomania can start to show up in people's mid to late teens. Looking back on my own life, I was one hell of a manic teenager. Just ask my parents how they earned their gray hairs. I was always chasing the mania, and I kept myself so busy that I never even slowed down to experience depression until I was in my early 20s. It's really common, though, for hypomania to be passed off as just normal teenage mood swings because of how emotionally driven this time in our lives can be. It's also common for teens to be diagnosed with something like ADHD initially and then bipolar disorder later in life, so keep that in mind. Hypomania can also be caused or exacerbated by medications. For example, sometimes treating just the depression with a single antidepressant can cause the mania to get worse. Or some meds that are prescribed for things that have nothing to do with mood disorders can cause hypomania as just a side effect, basically. That's why it's so important to always know what you're taking and be keenly aware of how it's impacting your life. Just a few milligrams of the wrong med can seriously send us for a loop. So, why do some people experience a wonderful euphoric high when they get manic and others experience horrific anxiety and agitation? Well, this gets into what we call euphoric mania, which is basically just like it sounds. It's a sense of euphoria or bliss when you're feeling manic. And then there's dysphoric mania, where people are manic, but instead of euphoria, they feel agitated, pessimistic, and just restless. It's a horrible feeling, and it often causes a lot of damage in our lives, and especially those around us. Dysphoric mania is also commonly called mixed mania or mixed states, and we're going to have an entire video dedicated to that later in this series. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned dysphoric and euphoric mania, though, to help put some words to the feelings that can be really hard for a lot of us to describe or understand. So now let's dive into full-blown mania, which is what those of us who have bipolar 1 experience. The symptoms include things like very fast racing thoughts that are just disconnected, grandiose beliefs like thinking I'm the smartest person in the world, inappropriate euphoria, or on the flip side, agitation, an intense desire to be active or feeling extremely restless, poor judgment like putting yourself in financial jeopardy or engaging in sexual promiscuity, talking louder or faster are usually telltale signs of mania when it comes to bipolar, having a huge increase in energy and less need for sleep, and commonly an increase in drinking or drug use, just like with hypomania. So what happens when those of us with type 1 bipolar go from experiencing hypomania to full-blown mania? Like, what happens during that transition? Well, here's basically what goes on. Our brilliant creative thoughts turn into just chaos and confusion. The euphoric energy that we were feeling can turn into horrible agitation. Good judgment turns into a complete lack of clarity or not being concerned with any consequences to our actions. And even the most intellectual people can't even keep a clear thought in their heads. The worst part is that we usually don't even realize that we're symptomatic until it's way too late. Basically until the party's over and we're left with a hangover and a lot of mess to clean up. It can also be really hard for people around us to understand how we could act like this without realizing it. It's so important to know that this is part of the illness. If we were completely aware of what we were doing and feeling, bipolar wouldn't be classified as a disorder or an illness. Now, I am absolutely not excusing bad or hurtful behavior, but symptoms of an illness need treatment, not judgment. Way easier said than done if you're the spouse, friend, or family member of someone who has bipolar. Believe me, I know it's tough. And I'm going to keep working as hard as I can on making videos to help everyone who's affected by the illness, including those around us. The next phase of mania that I want to talk about is full-blown mania with psychosis. And this is basically the end of the line for us. Psychotic mania and full-blown mania can be really similar. So let's use an analogy from one of my favorite authors, John Preston. People who are full-blown manic will drive 150 miles an hour and believe that they're invincible. But when you ask them if they think it's safe, they might say something like, well, it's probably not safe for others, but it's fine for me. I feel so good. What a rush. Now, if that same person literally believes that they're a superhero and they can stand in front of a car going 150 miles an hour and not get killed because they're invincible or something, that's the psychosis, because it's stemming from a bizarre delusion, basically. Another example would be a person with full-blown mania thinking that they could fly, but in the back of their head know that if they jump off of a building, it's probably going to kill them. Someone with full-blown manic psychosis will not only believe that they can fly, but they'll actually attempt to jump off of a building because they believe that they really can do it. There's a very fine but distinguishable line between the two. Unfortunately, a lot of people, and myself included, really like experiencing certain types of mania. When we've been depressed for a while and all of a sudden we feel alive, creative, loving, and excited about life, it's natural to chase that feeling or to engage in activities that can continue to feed the mania so we don't have to go back to feeling like we did before. The problem is that the longer we chase that feeling, the more we're just burning through dopamine and endorphins, literally creating a greater chemical imbalance in our body, which is the perfect recipe for a bad crash. Mania is like a drug for us in a lot of ways. We literally can feel high, almost like we took an upper or some kind of stimulant. So it isn't surprising that our behavior can be similar to drug addicts in a lot of ways. We either won't or can't acknowledge that there's a problem a lot of the times. We neglect self-care like eating or sleeping. We can obsess over stimulating things like video games, shopping, pornography, the news, or exciting hobbies. And we just keep going until the party's over or we crash. The longer we're high with mania, so to speak, the harder the crash is going to be. Also, the longer we chase that feeling, the easier it is for mania to progress into something worse like psychosis. Considering mania is a natural phenomenon, there's no drug addict stigma associated with it, which makes it even easier for a lot of us to believe that there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The last thing that we're going to talk about is treatment for mania. Now, here's the thing. Depression is universal. There might be different levels of intensity and duration when it comes to depression, but you can experience the same depression as someone who has bipolar without being bipolar. Mania is what changes the game. For someone with standard unipolar depression, they can take an antidepressant and be just fine. For someone who has bipolar, just taking an antidepressant alone can make the mania a lot worse. Typically, classes of drugs like mood stabilizers and antipsychotics are prescribed to treat mania. But again, if just the mania is treated, then the depression can get worse. Bipolar treatment has to be comprehensive and well-rounded to successfully treat the polar opposites of symptoms. It's common for combinations of drugs to be used to find that sweet, delicate spot of balance that we're all looking for. Also, lifestyle changes, self-awareness, self-care, therapy, and peer support can also make a profound difference. They just aren't as easy as taking a pill, and sometimes meds can help at least get us to a point to where we can function enough to incorporate other things like exercise, better food, and better sleep into our lives. Once we get to that point, a lot of people will find that they need less of their medication to get the same relief from symptoms. It's a journey, that's for sure, and you're not alone in your experience with this monster that we call bipolar disorder. If you have a specific diagnosis, make sure to look for that video in this series because I talk a lot more about treatment specific to each type. This video is getting a little bit long, so I'm going to wrap things up here. I think I've covered enough about bipolar mania to get some well-needed information out there. If this video's helped you out in any way, just imagine what it can do for others out there who are just starting out on their journey. If you want to help advocate for bipolar disorder, the simplest things can make a huge difference. The more people that interact with my channel by liking, commenting, or subscribing, the more YouTube is going to show these videos to a larger audience. If you believe, just like I do, that I can help others who have bipolar, please consider supporting my channel by interacting with it. Anyways, thank you for watching. Stay well, and I'll be back here soon with more Polar Warrior videos.